Welcome again to our Overseas X webinar series. We are joined again by David Lesperance. David is here again to talk to us, this time not just about taxes. He is a jack of all trades. He is now here to talk to us about immigration status and a lot of the things that you see when we're trying to get citizenship in other countries and understanding the laws of citizenship in other countries as you try to become a dual citizen or actually just be able to play in another country. And he's going to take us through a lot of those things. And David and I were just talking backstage for a while. We got some really cool stuff, some interesting stories. So, David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure joining you again, Kevin.
So, the career advantages of a second citizenship, those are something that a lot of athlete craves because you don't want to be in overseas sports. A lot of times there are only a few import slots, meaning spots for non-domestic players. So when you have very few spots that are reserved for non-domestic players, and you have a large quantity of athletes trying to get into those specific spots, in order to become a domestic citizen, you would have to get dual citizenship, so you wouldn't count against that. So that is a huge career advantage of being a second citizen, but it's much more difficult, I believe, than just a smile to get all these statuses. So if I have citizenship, am I able to, how difficult is it for me to be able to get a second citizenship, and why should I be pursuing that?
Sure. Well, one of the first things I'm going to clarify a few points. The first is that the United States allows you to have other citizenships. Most people just have two, hence the term dual citizens. But for example, my own children have three citizenships. So that's one thing. The second thing is people say, well, I have Italian ancestry, I've got an Italian passport, but I want to go play in Austria. You have to remember, if you're a citizen of the EU, according to the Treaty of Rome, not only do you have the right to live, work, and study in the country of your passport, but throughout all 27 different EU and EEA countries. So even though your target country may be Germany, but you have Portuguese ancestry, you'll still be able to play and you'll still be in that quota. And according to EU law, a German basketball, football team, hockey team cannot discriminate against you as a Portuguese versus you as a German
Mhm.
motorcycle. It always hits a. There's one guy I think he thinks is attractive to women by he's revving up his bike around this time.
It's the best.
It,
It's the best thing. I feel like at some point you got to realize that the revving of the engine is not as it doesn't have the same effect as the James Dean era anymore.
yeah. So when we look at lineage citizenships, you have to remember that each one of those European countries, for example, they have their own rules as to eligibility. Some can be fairly straightforward. For example, Ireland says if you have a parent or grandparent that was born in Ireland, you're entitled to your citizenship. Others, for example, in Poland, it could go back to somebody who was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but immigrated outside of Poland to a place like the United States in the 1920s, and they could still be eligible. So when you look at eligibility for any lineage citizenship claim, think of it as a steeplechase. The first is we find out whether you theoretically qualify it. The second is, can we get the documentation to prove to the government that you meet the qualifications? And sometimes that, depending on how distant the relative is, that could be, checking shoe boxes or talking to grandparents, all the way into hiring, and we refer people to, expert genealogists. Assuming you've crossed the first two hurdles, you then have to apply. Processing times, lineage citizenships typically are not fast processing times, so the sooner you start on this, the better. So even though you're maybe in your career already and thinking, oh well, I'm looking at maybe playing in Europe in a number of years, you should apply now and kind of get that in your pocket so that by the time you're actually going and looking at opportunities there, you've already got this in your pocket. You can get on a plane, you can arrive, you don't have to deal with immigration and visas and all of those good things. So that's kind of one of the importance. And I can tell you personally, I always have to preface this disclosure with, I swear my siblings and I didn't go out night clubbing looking for Europeans to dance with. But my sister married a Latvian, then a German. My brother married an Italian. I married a Scotswoman and a Pole. My younger sister married an Irishman. Now, I'm the only one of the four of us to actually pick up and move to Europe, but I can tell you all the Lesperance nieces and nephews and kids have done everything from gap years to study. I have a nephew who is, we have a lot of goalies in our family. He was a soccer slash football goalie, top collegiate Canadian, and got his Latvian passport. And so that gave him opportunities in Europe. I now have a niece who's in her last year of university. She's a hockey goalie, and she's currently exploring her options again for women's hockey, not only in the women's National Hockey League, but also in European leagues. So it can be a great benefit. It can also be a great benefit if later on you decide you want to retire somewhere in Europe.
Mm.
And it's something that you're going to pass on to future generations. So, in my own past, my ancestor who immigrated from France to Canada, that not only had a profound effect on their life, but of course, subsequent generations. Likewise, the United States being all of the Americas being, those were immigration destination countries, and the move from the old country to the Americas had a profound effect on their lives and their ancestor or their descendants.
Mhm.
Likewise, decisions that people make here. So there's lots of value if you've got the right family history on doing this. Now, some people just don't have the family history, which then leads into, what else should people be doing and taking control of in their lives.
Mhm. That's interesting because and before we go back into the lineage and how to kind of as we figure out that process, when we talk about as being a U.S. citizen, so I'm a U.S. citizen, I am going to another country. We know that U.S. allows you to have dual citizenship, so U.S. allows you to have citizenship with another country as well and have dual citizenship. Uh, does the other country allow you to keep your U.S. citizenship if you were to naturalize in that country?
That's an important point. So some countries do, some countries don't. Some countries have procedures. So, for example, if you were to go to Singapore, Singapore makes you, if you want to become a Singaporean, give up any existing citizenship that you have.
Okay.
So you have to understand the rules for the other country. One is dual citizenship. So, for example, India says if you become naturalized in another country, you automatically lose your Indian citizenship.
Okay.
So when we're looking at Europe, most of the countries allow dual citizenship. Some countries, for example, Germany, used to say when you become naturalized somewhere else, for example, in the United States, you lose your German citizenship. Then they changed the law to say, ask our permission before you become naturalized in the foreign country to retain your German citizenship. And now they say you're assumed to have wanted to retain your German citizenship. South Africa had similar rules. The ones in Europe that tend to be kind of the stickiest wickets are Denmark and the Netherlands.
Okay.
They are still the ones that have not impossible, but those are the ones, if you've got that ancestry, that you really want professional advice to make sure that you aren't forced to give up your U.S. citizenship or, as a function of law, are deemed to have given it up.
Interesting. So aside from allowing dual citizenship or not allowing dual citizenship, what are some of the other potential downsides of foreign citizenship for an American player?
So, one, for example, and we've talked about lineage, there's also, you can get this not only through family heritage, but through religious affiliation. For example, the law of return, making Aliyah in Israel. Um, if you make Aliyah and become Israel, whether you're male or female, you have to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces, so
Mhm.
military service. Greece has a similar thing, but only if you get that Greek citizenship, you're male, and you move to Greece. So
Okay.
if you get Greek citizenship to go play in Italy, no impact. And of course, it's only for a specific age. So these are kind of some of the little twists that you first want to say, do I have any possible claim? Explore those, go through our hurdles, but also in that when you're looking at the do I qualify, you also want to know, well, what are the downsides of success here if I clear the third hurdle?
That's interesting to think that you can go get Greek citizenship, play in another country, be fine, but you go back to Greece and you might be on the hook for having to serve, which is interesting. And I know that South Korea,
Up to a certain age.
okay, but it's just I mean there's so many countries. I remember we lost our point guard in South Korea because he had to go do his required military service like right before the season started, and everyone was like, it's like losing Bryce Harper right before the season, and everyone's like, oh, he's going to fight a war. You're like, what? It's crazy, but that's something that is really true. Now, when we get into that lineage citizenship and we talk about this is a thing a lot of guys and girls explore. They look at, okay, so like we had talked about before, my mother was Italian, my father was Greek. You have these ancestry going back. Now, when you have all of these, are the rules for lineage citizenship the same? Because if you are, say, I have an athlete who I'm working with now from his ancestry is from Nigeria. Now, he is trying to figure out a way to get his citizenship. Are the rules for lineage citizenship the same in a lot of these countries, or are there a lot of different rules?
No, each one is unique. So we actually have specific questionnaires. So so Italy is a good example. Italy used to be quite expansive. I mean, you could get somebody, from the time of Garibaldi and still qualify if they came from the right place. They changed the law, and one of the things is the laws are constantly changing. So they have changed the law. We're waiting for an interpretation, but it looks like they're going to restrict that for applicants from this point forward at grandparents or more. And one of the things that we get a lot of is somebody says, "Oh, my uncle looked into this 15 years ago, and the insert name of country told him they didn't qualify." Well, hold on. You don't if you're calling Italian passport, it's not like you get Italy on the phone. You get an individual who works for an Italian consulate or embassy. Embassies are in capital cities, consulates are in secondary cities, who may or may not know what you're talking about, who may or may not speak, your language as a first language, who may have just wanted to say, get rid of you because they were going for lunch. And you're assuming that the person asking the question asked the right question. You're assuming the person who answered the question gave the right answer. And you're assuming that nothing has happened since that phone call till today, all of which are dangerous assumptions. So you get lots of people say, oh, sure, I qualify. And I'll give an example from in my own life. My sister, um, her kids were a little younger, so my older brother and sister's kids were older. They pursued it a little more, and my younger sister kind of waited and waited and waited. Well, the kids all got Irish citizenship, but if she had applied when we first started talking about this, she, as the spouse, would have gotten an Irish passport.
Wow.
They changed the law. Now she doesn't. People who thought they could get Italian, okay, my cousin got it from my great grandmother. Well, that door may be closed. So it's one of the things, don't rely on old information that's either negative or positive. You need to get current information as to what the current law is. And some countries have language requirements. So, for example, Romania just changed their laws last year. For certain people, they now have to have a very high level of Romanian. If you don't speak Romanian, it's a tough language
Wow.
and things. So look early, get the proper information, get an advisor who's an expert to review, and then go through the steeplechase. Well worth the effort considering the payoff if you get it.
Absolutely. So we talked kind of about the steps. How long does that usually take to kind of go through that lineage citizenship, the steps involved to getting that lineage citizenship? How long does that usually take?
It varies from country to country. So I'll give you two kind of dramatic examples. Austria and Germany decided to expand their lineage citizenship to the descendants of people who either lost their citizenship as a result of the Nuremberg laws or lost their lives because of the Holocaust as a result of Nazism. So Austria, for example, got the proper documentation. They're kind of the gold standard. They will assign an individual with a phone number and a direct email, and they'll process that application in as short as 3 to 5 months.
Wow.
Um, on the other hand, Poland, where I live right now, we do a lot of Polish lineage citizenships. Unfortunately, the same department that deals with those lineage citizenship claims at the front end is the same department that's dealing with this massive influx of Ukrainian refugees. So the laws are the same, but the ability of the bureaucracy to process. And so there you can be looking at a year and a half, 2 years.
Wow. So so there's, I mean, we talked about there's obvious benefits to trying, and even a year and a half, 2 years, if it does pay off, if you're good enough, I always say in like the overseas game, and you have something where the immigration status might take a little more time. However, you are currently jobbed overseas, you have a job, you have a career, keep going, keep pursuing it because as you go, it's like any other business. Eventually, that might lead to a pay raise or an easier time later. So it's just being disciplined, which is what I'm trying to teach the athletes all the time. Be disciplined to look at something as this is necessary now. Because it's going to help me later. So I think that's a great it's a great point right there.
And you may have got one of those coveted foreigner slots right now, but there's always some young buck or doe that's coming up behind you, and if you can stay on the roster because now I'll give up that slot. You can keep me on because now I'm a European.
What are so are there ways to kind of bridge the gap between when you are waiting for your lineage citizenship to go through? What are some of the bridge statuses you can get before you finalize that lineage citizenship?
Sure, and this kind of plays into even those people who don't have their citizenship. Um, is they rely on the team to deal with all the immigration. Oh, the team takes care of all that. You have to have ownership of your own status and follow those things because what happens if you're no longer playing but you've fallen in love with the country or a native thereof and you want to stay, and you haven't you haven't explored everything. Hey, I can convert this temporary status that the team gets me just to play for the next season to a more permanent status, or maybe I can even naturalize depending on what the rules and how long I've been here. um, so you want to really understand and take ownership of that process. So for the person who says, okay, well, I have Polish citizenship, I'm playing in Austria right now, I'm going to get a temporary kind of work permit equivalent status in Austria to allow me to play. Well, that's the kind of bridge status that you can get.
Okay.
Some countries, another status, which is one of the few good things that came out of the pandemic, is this concept of a digital nomad. You have to be very careful in making sure because when people talk about digital nomads, their initial thought is, college grads with a backpack and a laptop,
That's where my mind went.
which they are. But I've got people who manage their portfolios. I've got a couple of CEOs who all so what the countries the purpose that they had was we want to have people who have enough money to take care of themselves, who have medical insurance, and who are going to sit down and have an espresso for breakfast and pay 23% VAT. Long-term residents, but the key is that they have monies available to them, but they're not negatively impacting the local um, the local employment situation. So one of the things we had a client who was this exact situation, who in that case it wasn't an athlete, but it was somebody who was going to be creating jobs. So we got him a digital nomad we showed that he qualifies for lineage citizenship in another EU country, he will be getting that. And please give him this digital nomad visa as a bridge document because his presence is not just, paying VAT for breakfast, but he was actually going to bring certain types of innovation into and cause direct and indirect employment. Likewise, if you've got an athlete that's going to, put butts in seats or otherwise, raise up a franchise, um, that could be an argument with, a good advocate who could successfully get one of those bridge documents
That's incredible.
along with the normal work permits that athletes get.
And it's a different way to go about it that I've never even knew about the ability to, if you are generating a great income, which I mean, I look at some of these guys like a TJ Shorts and Mike James, guys who are huge names in overseas basketball. And when they come in, like they really do impact the local economy. I mean, I've talked to teams in Italy that whole with Trieste, like they the whole entire Jordan experience. Now they still have that huge Jordan collaboration that they're working on, and it's just like his presence. Just for like he was there for a little bit of time. He was there for like a day, just this little time, and all of a sudden it's just like this huge montage. There's just so many Americans who can go over and affect the economy in the basketball sphere. So it's a great to know that there's something else that exists if you don't have lineage citizenship to be able to still find a way to work your way into a dual citizenship slot.
And one of the things, people go, how do you know all this stuff? And it's like, well, I know a lot of stuff, but I know the people who know the latest. So we would always use local counsel, whether it's a lineage citizenship or a digital nomad, etc. But I could see, for example, as we're talking, if you've got somebody who has got image rights and is going to, be selling merch, we can set that up outside. That can be their employer. There's their personal image country. I mean, in my own household, my son likes Ronaldo and I like Messi. And so when they both got in tax, I kind of dug into Messi's tax thing. And I'm like, if he had just gotten proper advice, done it right, would have had the tax savings and wouldn't have had the hassle. And so it's worth it to get proper advice. Don't rely on, somebody says, "Oh, I think I know a guy who did this," the Sepp Blatter style of tax planning, which don't tell them about. Um, you want to get proper advice because in today's world, with something called FATCA and something called the Common Reporting Standard and exchange of information, and tax information, being run through Palantir and all that, you know, Jason Bourne doesn't exist. You're not going to be able to have secret bank accounts.
Well, it's a Sepp Blatter. That's if they don't know, yeah, just Google that name. You'll find out a lot of information about the overseas world and how some of those overseas sports worlds work. So we were talking a little bit before I let you go. Just when we talk about an athlete who might have been in a city for a long time and marrying someone in that city and then working towards becoming, or in that country and then working towards becoming a citizen through marriage. We talked a little bit about, some baseball situations where this actually happens. So a guy or a girl heads overseas, they end up meeting their spouse there. Their spouse is a foreign citizen. How does that work in that process and what would you suggest to an athlete in that process to get citizenship that way?
Sure. So if we look at baseball, hockey, and basketball, and even football, American football, and the Canadian Football League, we have a lot of Canadian athletes going to the US and American athletes coming to Canada. And again, you want to take ownership of your immigration status. So when I lived in Toronto, I lived in a building where I looked out the window at the Rogers Center where the Jays played and Air Canada Center where the Raptors was off. I could see it to our left, and then the Leafs were behind them, and got to know in our building a gentleman who was kind of an iconic Jays player, and he had fallen in love with and married a Canadian, adopted her daughter. They were having another daughter. The reason I got to know them was because she was pregnant at the same time as my wife was pregnant with these two twins here. And so I eventually, of course, got to know him as, again, recent father sitting down. And I said, like, what do you do for, oh, the Jays take care of that. And I go, um, and if the Jays cut you loose, he goes, oh, I've been here for, over a decade. I go, yeah, but you have no status, but a continual status that you think the back office is taken care of. Do you want to live in Canada? He goes, yeah. I mean, my whole life and family is here. And I said, well, you better apply for permanent residence. I mean, you're married to a Canadian, so you've got a very simple path
Yeah.
uh, to being able to do that. So you should take that up. Likewise, for Canadians going to the United States, they don't realize that the US is fairly unique in taxing both green card holders and citizens. So I've had clients who said, well, I went and played hockey in the States, but I always thought I was going to, retire back home in Canada. What do you mean I have ongoing US tax and the state tax liability because Canada doesn't have a state tax? Well, you got a green card and you kept that for more than 8 years. Yeah, the team thought it would be a good idea. Yeah, but you didn't think. Oh, I
Uh,
took up citizenship. Oh, well, because when we had a big ceremony and they welcomed me on the ice and all this stuff, that's great that you just tied yourself to the United States tax wise for the rest of your life. Oh, well, I didn't again because I'm busy playing. I'm not going to take care of my financial life. I'm not going to take care of my personal life. I am going to rely on somebody else to take care of that, which is, you really have to take ownership of your life. And we deal with all kinds of things like, people have criminal charges.
mhm.
Um, I got called in. This is a classic case. So Chris Brown,
Okay.
uh, the pop star, was playing. He had two concerts in Canada, completely sold out. The Air Canada Center, live entertainment. It spent God knows how much money, and the way these concerts work is they move like the set to you've got one night. Meanwhile, the second set is going to set up the next night, and they leapfrog.
Uh-huh.
And so they'd rented the Air Canada Center. They've done all this marketing, all this ticket sales, had brought in the crew, set up the thing. Chris Brown appears at the border, and a former border official, which I was going through law school, said, Mr. Brown, yeah, you've got criminal charges here. Yeah, I got to go. I got a concert. It's like, no, you're not coming in.
Wow.
So again, that could have been dealt with beforehand. That's how I got live entertainment as a client. But because that was an expensive. Oh, nobody thought about it. Oh, we thought the manager would take care of that. Manager thought, hey, I represent Chris Brown.
Yeah.
Doors open for me. Not realizing you were entering a foreign country. When I grew up, there was an old hockey player named Bob Probert, who was a Canadian who grew up and went to high school at the same time I did. And Bob Probert had a bit of a problem in multiple things. And at one point, he was in the United States, and he couldn't. If he went home to Canada, he wouldn't be able to get back in.
Wow.
Well, that meant he couldn't play against the Leafs or the Canadians or the Canucks or the Oilers and stuff. But he decided, well, how many teams are there? American teams in the NHL? I'll stay there. And eventually, kind of, so you have to be kind of very conscious of these things. They may be complete barriers, or they may be problems which, if properly dealt with beforehand, but you're not going to be able to talk your way, through at the airport or, at Niagara Falls. Not certainly.
Well, David, this has been absolutely amazing. Of course, as usual, you've given a lot of information, and all our athletes need to be able to uh, reach out to you if they are interested in learning some more about this or trying to figure out their own statuses as well, because you are a very brilliant mind, and we really appreciate you jumping on with us today to explain a lot of these situations that many overseas athletes deal with.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I don't know about brilliant, but if you do anything for 3.5 decades, you get fairly good at it. So
That's what I heard about basketball, but see, people still told me otherwise. Well, David, thank you so much. This has
thank
been
you.
Overseas X web series with David LaSparence. We'll see you guys next time.